let's talk about Anomalous Subsurface Environment 2 and 3, which is one book. It's 2 modules, arguably, theoretically. It's a sequel to ASE 1, which I've reviewed elsewhere on this channel, which I really liked. This is all the books there are for ASE, and there aren't likely to be any more. So what is it? You don't have to watch my previous review to know what's going on here. You might like to. But basically, this is a Dungeons and Dragons mega dungeon, a big environment where most of the campaign takes place. Rather than going around different places, a lot of what you'll be doing is based in this one place, this one big weird dungeon. And in this case, it's a mountain which has inside it a strange, seemingly, or not necessarily intelligent, but self-willed environment which creates stuff to test adventurers. It's science fantasy, it's set in the future, but with kind of fantastic elements and magic. It's gonzo, it's very silly and over the top. And some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it. There's just a lot to the first book, which I did compliment a lot in terms of as a setting in the Land of a Thousand Towers. This is much more of a mega dungeon supplement. It's that and much more, but I'll get to that. Let's just talk very quickly contents. There are 145 pages or thereabouts. 84 pages describe 2 levels of a mega dungeon. So, in the dungeon you go down and down to harder and harder bits, including a sub-level, a kind of side level to the others. There are 31 pages of monsters. There are 4 new classes. There are 4 new major bad guy NPCs outside of the dungeon. Wizards, in this case, is the wizards of the Thousand Towers are bad guys, basically. There are 6 rival adventuring parties, and there are some spells, some super science items, and some magic items. The bulk of the material, therefore, the majority, over half, is a couple of hundred extra rooms. I think over 250 rooms, I think, to the dungeon itself, to the mega dungeon. That inverts the share in ASE 1, where the majority, the dungeon material between the intro area, level 0 and level 1, is a quarter of the book. Here, it's over half of the book. But the setting material, the mechanical material, are still a massive addition and really useful resources for a campaign here. So we're going to talk about all of it. There are more rumours, there are more NPCs, there are weird mushrooms, there are weird henchmen. Let's just get going and have a look at the sorts of things that are in here. So it is a great cover, by the way. This is it a Brian Thomas? Yeah, it's Brian Thomas. Really wonderful thing with various stuff that's going on in the levels under discussion. Dinosaurs, circuses, axe guitar axes, big top men, all kinds of weird things going on there. Okay, it's made for Labyrinth Lord, a version of D&D which is a retro clone, a rewrite of the old basic expert rules from the 80s. So you can use it with BX, you can use it with Labyrinth Lord, you can use it ultimately with any version of old school D&D without really any serious restatting or work. So you've got, additional Denethix encounters and rumours. Denethix is the city at the centre of the setting, which has enough material in this first book to run loads of stuff in. So you've got crimes you're wanted for, NPCs professors of the Academy of Elevated Thought, henchmen for hire, what does a mushroom do, things like that. You've got more random tables, and the random tables were great in the first one, so that's just more stuff. The classes, the classes are really the science fantasy player's handbook. They're a supplement for any science fantasy game, I think, and by that I mean where you have scientific elements. There's robots, there's laser beams, but really it's all fantasy. You'd say Star Wars, for instance, which is a space opera, really skirts that line into, because it's got mystical knights with laser katanas. It's science fantasy, really. It's not this kind of science fantasy, but it's in that genre. You could use these in particularly a kind of post-apocalyptic or super strange science fantasy. So the 4 classes, there are insect men of the Lanthanide Wastes, there's Mokhtars, there's robots, there's scientists. Scientists are humans who can augment their bodies and tools with a panoply of different things. Little buzzsaws, lasers, scanners, things like that. Robots are robots, and they progress at a steady rate, adding very specific, always the same abilities at each new level. And insect men and Mokhtars are demi-humans, basically. Insect men are Thri-Kreen kind of things. A big thing that they're kind of fighter types. It's hard to say. Their prime rec is dexterity, so maybe you might see them, and they're hit dice D8. You might see them as a missile fire type, but given that they are immune to undead effects on the whole, they are immune to radiation. They're also not a bad frontline fighter. Mokhtars, super tough. Super violent, natural attacks kind of thing. They're based on Mok from Thundar the Barbarian. And they're all great. They're all unique. They're all rich. And mechanically, I've seen them all in my game of ASE, so I would say they all work. Mechanically, if we're worrying about that, the robot is perhaps a little soft. What I mean is, let's see if I can get us there. So I mean, they've got a D8 hit die. They've got average saves, good versus poison. Their THAC0 is what you'd expect for a first level character, and then they have they've got an unarmed attack at D4, and that's all they have at first level. They then add extra things, increasing combat ability, adding a hover ability at third level. So you're talking about getting to third level before you have anything more than a 1d6 inherent plus immunity to radiation and stuff. It's fairly limited, and it's something where therefore high strength is going to be really the only useful stat early on, arguably, even though con is the prime requisite. In the end, most old school campaigns, especially BX, Labyrinth, Lordy kind of campaigns, no one's going to care. It's not a problem. No one's going to be like, man, I wish I had a more powerful mechanical build. But it's worth saying that, the other thing is that AC improves, but again, it starts very high. So robots are really, I guess, they are a almost parodic version of old school wizards, where wizards start relatively fragile but get very, very powerful. And it's the same here, I think. They're really, but even more so because there's no spells. The backup is fairly null. The wizards, there are 4 wizards. Wizards are bad people because they want to use magic to take over the Land of 1,000 Towers. They are usually basically crazy people, I think is the gimmick, isn't it? There's 4 new wizards. There's Cranius, this guy. He flies around. He's a giant head in a giant kind of, I guess, frame or whatever. And he is a flying helmet, I think. And he fires lasers from his eyes, and he commands headless apes. He's very fast. He maintains a Saturn V rocket as his tower, including his original headless withered human body. That's rich. There's stuff there. Now, one thing is that beyond in the first book, the general kind of like what happens as you're going around, do you get random encounters in the wilderness? There's no other way that these wizards are built in. They are something you've got to build in yourself into the campaign. But Wetmore, the author, I think he does trust the audience to DMs who are going to run this to do that. The expectation is that if you can take these concepts and make them live, there's not going to be a problem with your players going and deciding they might want to rob a wizard. Nonetheless, that is maybe something which you could imagine being better, is just some sort of sense of added coherence. This connects to this, the writer doing some of the hard work for you, because one of the reasons that most of us buy supplements is to get our hard work done for us. And I think here what would improve that is extra ideas to engage, say in this case, the wizards in the game. The Toymaker, he is a wannabe wizard with weapons and minions like Robin Williams from Toys. I don't know if he's actually inspired by Robin Williams from Toys, but basically he's that guy. Tyrannus Horace, he's a simple lad given to simple desires, such as using electricity to burn all opposition to smoking heaps of ash. And Umbra, Master of Shadows. There are these NPC adventuring parties. Interesting here, you've got a well-being table. So you get the information about these rival parties who you'll be trying to rob stuff in before they get to it, maybe rob stuff from, maybe fight, ally with even. Some of them might be fair weather friends, particularly, say, Expedition 17B from the Cult of Science, who are a religious sect who worship scientific documents. But nonetheless, this gives you a way, that sounds great, but also, well, what happens if, how do you simulate things happening to them? That's the way to put it. How do you simulate how far they've progressed? And so you check how they've done. When you encounter them below ground, what wealth do they have, and what's happened to them? They could all be new there, they could be doing quite well with money, with lots of money, or they could be nearly all dead. And yeah, there's scientists, there's mercenaries, there are prospecting adventurers, there's an obviously bad guy group who you're just going to want to kill. Even if you're allied with them, you're then going to want to kill. So good variety of stuff. Not exactly super modern setup, layout stuff here. This is very much a clean version of a 1977 module in that sense. And it's certainly one thing that for only decade-old modules, something I certainly look back at as I read these and use these. I'm like, one thing that we have improved is information design. You see this even in the early days. By second edition, there are significant information design decisions that initially actually are mostly improvements and then go horribly wrong. And I think you see the same here, that these are from the early peak of the OSR, and they are very basically set out and in a way that most of us could do, and that's fine. That no criticism of the effort put in. But now a lot of newer publishers are putting a lot more time into that, and hopefully, usually, it's worth it as long as the content is good. As long as the content's good, you want to be able to use it, and therefore you want usability. This is relatively low on usability, I would say. Also, and this is maybe less surprising, unindexed and fairly primitive content section, things like that. One thing to add actually about the rival parties is that they are a way, and this is one reason they're a good addition, they are a way of making what's happening here with this mega dungeon opening up to the world seem important to the outside world and to produce a living environment rather than a kind of purely hermetic environment that the PCs come into. It's something which has various interacting components. And there's the same with the way in which, and we'll get back to this, but time passes as a mechanic when you get to new levels means that the rest of the world interacts as well. And there's new updates on what's happening in different parts of the mountain. I'd say I struggle probably to use rival parties except as a random encounter, with the exception perhaps of the crows from Deep Carbon Observatory, who I really found a great addition. But they're difficult to use because they suggest a proactivity and a creativity as a player on the part of the DM, which you might reserve for defending monsters, you might reserve for sort of the decision making of certain major local players in reaction to the players, but it creates a different role, and many DMs love that and are good at that. I like the idea, but I'm probably less strong at, something to improve at. So level 2, level 1 had sort of Batmen and goblin alien kind of spawn without a hive mind to lead them. Level 0 had robots chiefly, and level 2 has factions. It's got painted men, descendants of human staff who are housed here, and had made a little circus to entertain their kids, which has now gone horrendously wrong in the last 1,000 years. You've got necromantic midgets, and you've got troglodytes, and they each have things they want and things they know. And so there is some suggestion of the tinderbox of faction play, where you play one faction off against the other, you find out things from one faction, you trade that knowledge as you keep going. These 3 factions, I think I find... and there's also a time passes section and a wandering monster chart. We will skip past that. I think it's... None of these factions seem super simple to ally with. None of them seem as dynamic as in some cases. To give an example of something in some ways fairly close to this in terms of feel, Hill Cantons, I've reviewed that elsewhere on the channel. In that case, let's say in Slumbering Ursine Dunes, you have a few factions. You've got a lawful guy in the little village, you've got a chaotic but good, or essentially chaotic good guy in a tower, and then you've got a chaotic evil shark man dude. These three, and then you've got lawful evil, evil elves, basically David Bowie elves, and these four factions. All there's explicit ways in which you might come to negotiate with them, things they want that you might be able to convince them to. If they're good, they might just be willing to negotiate and say, okay, we'll help you on this basis. If they're evil, you might be able to stay their anger and do something and get away or get some minor reward. And I think that's good explicit guidance on how to run those things. Whereas here, these factions are all sort of dangerous and mad, or the troglodytes just, they like to eat people, they're deeply hostile, they'll seek to murder and eat anyone. The necromantic midgets are an artificial life form created from compressed corpses, and they want to conquer the ASE. They kind of want corpses, and so maybe you can negotiate, but they want to conquer everywhere there, and they're obviously awful. The painter men are crazy and dangerous and erratic. You can see that there's limited obvious scope for the tinderboxing, so mostly you're just screwing around and seeing what happens. That can be fun, but I think it's something where if you were to run those factions as described here, most players would take the hint and decide to run or kill, and that's fine as well. But you want some spread, some ability to do different things for players, I think. So let's time passes. I'll talk quickly about this. This is also on level 1 when you get down to that from level 0. And here the idea is that things change in the outside world as you change, essentially. And technically, once you have this, you can actually, because the entrance into the 3rd level is open and only guarded by, but by a tribe of Mokhtars, you could actually get into the 3rd level from the point you're up at the 1st level. Once you have these two, you can do that. But the idea that you abstractly represent world events is interesting and clever. It means you're not doing strict time records, per Gary Gygax's advice. I tend to be a strict time records guy. But you abstract it and say, well, look, player progress is the trigger. I have also done some things to do with that when I've designed stuff in the past, where, when they hit a certain level, the players, more events happen, factions who haven't been interfered with advance their plans. And I think this is a good idea, something we could probably steal more. And it explains the way that as the Mega Dungeon opens up, other factions interact with it in a very specific way. So you're not trying to roll dice to see what happens. You don't have to work it all out yourself. This is actually, if you like, what I've just complained about to do with factions on level 2, that you've got a DM lead. That means that you are there to run the game, not to invent every single major component of it beyond room descriptions. And I think, as I say, I go to products to do that. So this is a big win, just the general time passes thing. You've got a wandering monster table, as you can see. And you've got a few more tables here actually based on special rooms. You then have the maps. Again, this is a layout thing. Maps are near the start of each level across both books, and that's kind of fine. It's also kind of annoying. I'd rather they're in the middle. I'd rather they're at the end. This being perfect bound is part of the issue here, that it's harder to flick and open to and lay out in front of you anyway. So the sort of things about having a map stuck at a random place in the book is more annoying than it would be otherwise. But in lots of modules, you have them in the middle or at the end, and that is easier for knowing roughly where they are. As I look at this book, I don't know where those are. I have them dog-eared, I think, basically because so that is that's level 3. For instance, further on, that is dog-eared. So I've done it that way, but nonetheless, it seems like an imposition to me to have to do that. But again, it's a decade old. I'm not complaining too much. The map basically sets up. There are these 3 areas. You've got the circusy area. You've got the necromantic midget area, and then you've got these caverns, which the troglodytes and a bunch of other stuff are in. And there's an obvious geographic dynamic here that you can see to do with the way the factions interact across the map. Circus theming. There's ticket takers who shout ticket and 1 gold, but will fight you if you try to break your way in and attack them. There is the midway, loads of games. Carnival Barker Barnabas, who who's trying to convince you to try the games and go into the circus. There's a painted man operating a shell game. with a star quartz worth 50 GP, but also 3 Screechman skulls. Those are the bat people from the level above. A freestanding sign in front of an archway with the amazing subsurface freak show. A freestanding sign in front of the archway reading Maze of Mirrors. So you've got this micro... It's not really a settlement because it's... in most respects, it's not set up so you think, oh, this is a place we'd stay or anything. But the idea that it's a... there's lots of this kind of interactive multiple option rooms, which certainly... and I think this is something that ASE is one of the best at for me. The idea that you have a room with just lots of stuff going on in it that isn't a combat room, but is a press button here, do thing here. We'll see lots of examples of this as we go through. But I think this is a good example of that. There's a big top. There's things going on. There's an Allosaurus. There's the Bundini twins, who, will... and there's all these things they're doing to screw you over and get you to fight the Allosaurus or something like that. Things that might happen. There's big cats. There's a carousel which can heal you or damage you depending on the direction of travel. This is fun. Some people don't like it. I think it's right to acknowledge that. I think someone on the ASE1 video I did said he just didn't like the silly over-the-top factions, especially as you got further down. So I think the circus faction was an example. And in a way, it's not really my style. It's not something I would write, but then I've bought it, haven't I? I've gone and got someone else to write it for me. And so the idea that you just have, at some level, it also depends on the group. I know the group I run ASE with enjoys this stuff. I know that they want a fairly light and easy game where they get to solve some puzzles, do some role play, mess around, fight something. And so the way in which the world is dumb is not unappealing to them. It's actually something where the not just Technicolor but sort of Hodorowski-esque bizarreness is an appeal to them. So yeah, I think it's good fun. Your mileage may vary. I guess bear that in mind. If you're thinking, I love the idea of a Science Fantasy Mega Dungeon, you better love that it's got like necromantic midgets and circus freaks in it. There are lots more silly things. Maze of Mirrors, the Freak Show. Sorry about that. Freak Show. There's an interesting thing now that I'm thinking in terms of your Overton window stuff. How many people would now think, oh, I'll write a circus freak show into my my module. But here it's something where the whole thing is bizarre and a self-mockery. It's a multi-layered mockery, and I think it works pretty well. There's lots of this. That's one thing, is that you've got content for years here. I think one of the two things that I guess ward off my disappointment or caution that this is not finished, we've not been Game of Thrones'd on this, this is something where, though it's unlikely to be finished, one of the two things that comforts me, along with the fact there's so much on the blog that you can work out stuff from. The other thing is just that, how quickly are you getting through 400, 500 rooms of stuff? Yes, players might get to level 3 and just go down, I grant that, but on the whole, that's not what happens. You don't have people drop without difficulty levels 1 to 5 or something of a dungeon. And so here, and this is designed so that doesn't happen super often. There are some shortcuts intentionally, but you don't have very many of these kinds of crazy ones. In fact, more or less 1 to 3 become semi-self-contained, linked by a sub-level down to level 5, and that's it. Yeah, dinosaurs. Ball pits. Of course there's a ball pit. Reward long sought for. Security. Learnatorium. I'll say something about the Learnatorium because I think it's interesting. I think that one of the major things we do in D&D, one of the major things that players enjoy, that DMs enjoy often, again, your mileage may vary, is the idea that there are deeper secrets to be discovered that require effort, engagement, searching, problem solving. And so here, the Learnatorium, as a prehistoric in one sense, as in from the time that this was a scientific experiment centre, it has stuff about how things work in the ASE, or at least sort of how things work. It's actually stupid, like you're meant to be learning stuff, but there's a basic accounting module which just discusses amortization. There's arithmetic where you get insulted. There is entertainment about I guess General Hospital, I think it's meant to be. you're talking about something where you learn about in a parodic way, about the prehistoric, if you like, Fallout bunker-esque life, the Vault-esque life of the people who lived here, who are now the Painted Men, in fact. And that's one of the you could call it an Easter egg, but really it's, it is an Easter egg, but really it's a normal secret the players aim for, to discover what's going on. And so to know more about the prehistoric humans who did stuff before the bombs fell is fun, and this is it's again in the humorous vein or register that everything else is in, but I think it's good. It's an unreliable narrator, but it is a narrator giving both you, the DM, and the players an insight into the world. So yes, let's keep going. There's lots of, and I could give lots and lots of examples of this, lots of these interactive things. There's a head exchanger. If you use the tool right, you can swap heads for stuff. You get an incredibly handsome human male head with increased charisma, a giant fly head unable to speak, a Medusa's head. You can now turn people to stone. There's loads of this stuff. I think that's room 65. There's another one, 83, just a bit on, which is exactly the same kind of, not the same room, but the same sort of feel. I've already talked about that idea that Wetmore is very good at just making a room where you press buttons and bad stuff happens. But when I say bad stuff, it's not... This is the thing with some Lamentations of the Flame Princess modules, where you just go into a room and you press stuff and horrible things happen. You go and try something out. Oh, no, you're dead. You don't want only bad stuff to happen, do you, when your players are experimenting? Because otherwise they stop experimenting. And here, the fact there are a couple of just flat good ones. There's a breathe water one. There's a kind of bad one to do with echolocation. There's one that gives you a stone gaze. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. Yeah, and you get the idea anyway that if subject isn't already fat, their charisma is decreased by 1 point. The idea that you've got a 3 in 10/4 in 10 chance there of something which is mechanically good. It might be difficult in other ways, but it's mechanically good. And so because players, one of the underrated things about most players when we talk about it from particularly an OSR perspective, is that players aren't incentivized. I think we sometimes act like they aren't incentivized by cool stuff, in the sense of like, my character can do something extra, even if it's only a +1 to hit. So yeah, +1 swords as a mainstay are boring, but the idea that a player can just get a bonus, players like that. We all like that. We all like the idea that we've in some way advanced and achieved something, even if the wider interesting game is the world and the discovery. And so here, the fact that there's a bit of a roulette wheel thing going on where you can get something really good or something really bad, rather than just bad stuff, I think players like that, and people will take risks on that. When I did a College of Magic in a city, I just found someone had done a great D1000 random magical effects, and I was like, yep, when you do some stuff in this room, I roll on this table. And the player's like, I want to do it, even though you're like, man, there are some really bad things on this table. There are some really awful things on this table. People felt that the risk reward was good enough and entertaining enough to go for it, and I think this is a good example of that. So another thing to note, which is again in terms of here, by the way, I've just skipped over another, this isn't quite a roulette wheel thing, but a cryogenic cylinder thing, kind of Fry from Future Armor, where you can wake them up, you can just take them out if they're ready to thaw, and there's a guy who's dying but has valuable pearls inside. There's a guy from the 21st century, there's I, me, or you. There's a human male with no skin. I assume he's dead, I don't know. And then there are a couple other people. So that's another one of those interactive things as an example. But 84 to 90 rooms, 84 to 90 are the headquarters, the surgery of Dr. Giggles, the leader of the Painted Men. And here, this is the thing I thought was worth possibly talking about, is that something that video games have taken over from D&D and other role-playing games, but which perhaps, again, in more old-school veins, we maybe sometimes dissociate ourselves from, is the boss area. The boss, there is an area in the dungeon where there's a big bad who you have to defeat to win. And of course, in some situations, it's going to be appropriate for an adventure just to have a big boss. You know, what I mean is if it's the hooks are about the terrible evil spreading. Yes, you might have a route for the players to ally with the terrible evil, but a lot of the time the players are going to end up killing the terrible evil. So that's obviously a boss fight. Here, this is not a boss fight. You can technically try to work to ally with the Painted Men. This is optional. This is a side quest. Players decide, but nonetheless, it's still good to have areas where essentially the players can say, "Look, again, risk reward. There's some stuff there that's really valuable or good. We'll get XP from it, but it's really high risk comparatively because it's like boss level." And I think when you understand it like that, I think then you can see the boss fight as a legitimate descent of the old school genre. And Dr. Giggles, painted man in a bloodstained white doctor's jacket, usually found in this room vivisecting a hapless dungeon inhabitant. Equal chance for a necromantic midget, painted man, or troglodyte. If attacked, he stabs with a scalpel. Notably, if attacked, he may well be willing to talk to you. That is a worthwhile thing to see, that even though it's not set up like they're very amenable to negotiation, even though in fact their presentation will make lots of players want to attack them, they are open to discussion, and that's where you can get that information out. You can see, yeah, he's learned everything about medicine from years of watching hospital soap operas at the Learnatorium, back to what we were mentioning. It was a good gag, basically. And yeah, there's a bunch of this stuff. He can operate on you. There are medicinal effects. Not all these things are good. Your sweat becomes oily and highly flammable. Maybe that's good, maybe it's useful, maybe it's really terrible. Who thought... Yep, you just get given cyanide, say versus poison, or die. In an operation, you die. There's an infection, a vital organ is inadvertently discarded. You might get a different limb. An organ-shaped chunk of gold is found in the patient's body, I guess because of mutations. This is all weird and stupid. It's not necessarily what you want to happen. It may be enforced upon you. You may volunteer for it. So again, there's interaction, and that's one thing. It may be a twist on the boss level, is that it is presented pretty much as this is the network of dungeon rooms around the boss level. But you don't have to do that. Why not go and negotiate? And that's a deepening of it, which again Wetmore is generally speaking good at. Not always. There's stuff like, I think on level 1, I talked about this at the time, the Screechmen and the Goblins there, two of the major factions, are sort of non-negotiable with, in the sense there's nothing you could possibly say or do, or any conversation you could have that'd be worthwhile, and they're likely to be hostile if you go where they are. Here, even though the factions aren't presented as interactive and have a certain degree of innate hostility, particularly the troglodytes, there is a way in which he then opens up the world to that and creates the opportunities. It's just not well presented. It's not done up front, but it is great once you're there, I'd say. So yeah, I like that a lot. We are going to move on now down to the kind of area, the lair of the necromantic midgets, including a hinge-headed ambassador of the basalt ziggurat on the 4th level, along with his 2 Neanderthal slaves. You've got interlevel interaction here. The necromantic midgets are, again, there's a possibility of negotiating, or at least it's left open. They take an embassy from the hinge-headed, but again, maybe it's just left a bit unclear as to how you're meant to do that, I think. They are fine. They're good fun. They merge into the caverns, and you can see we've got a separate wandering monster chart for that. But yeah, these caverns, they're a wilder environment. They are inhabited by all kinds of things. There's a weird grey void where if you go into the pit in the floor here, you go into a formless grey void. The pit is, and yeah, it's essentially bottomless and then extends out, and you can go and meet stuff there, and that's a closed window drifts by. On the other side, the window opens onto a nondescript room with a man banging frantically on the window, soundlessly screaming for help. The window cannot be slowed or stopped by the players. Void worm, deep groaning, a skeleton. I mean, here it's kind of interesting. There is an option of, I guess you could, I don't know, there's not really lots that's interactive here in the sense that you can do anything. It's just kind of weird. Maybe that's okay, I guess. You can, yep, you've got a connection here. on 122D, is it? Or is it 121D? 121D. That connects up to level 1. And then you've got, a shaft, things that might happen in the shaft there. The Northern Grotto, again, you've got lots of different places you can go and do stuff in. Particularly relevant here is F, the Man from Below. There's a couple of things connected to this, but the Man from Below, who is a sort of... Oh, wait, he's a guy who keeps essentially waking up where he started and writing new stuff in his diary, and he doesn't know what's going on. His assigned name is James Gordon, although he prefers the much more dramatic Man from Below. He's from Under Miami. He always makes his way to somewhere called the Deep Tower, the sub-level associated. This is a fun mystery and a genuinely interactable NPC who isn't basically weird and creepy and you don't really want to deal with because they might kill you. And having some that's good. In fact, I think that's something that arguably is, at points for me, lacking in ASE. Is until I guess you get to Under Miami on, I think, level 4, which we don't have. You can look at level 5, which you can look at some of the ideas and details on the blog, Henchman Abuse. But I think that's something where until you get there, you don't have way stations and super interactive parts that aren't basically dangerous and unpleasant, like the circus. Yeah, you can do stuff there, but it's bad. You might benefit from it, but it's a high risk. And possibly, I suppose maybe you expect players to be going down to lower entrances in as they advance through the dungeon, or creating way camps. That's another option, especially with kind of henchman play. Why not create a camp on level 2 as you go down to level 3? That sort of thing. I could see that. But I think there is some degree of maybe a missed opportunity where there are so many crazy things and disgusting, weird monster factions that an opportunity is missed to have more things like the Man from Below, where there is a wide-ranging chance for kind of normal, inverted commas, role-playing. Again, your mileage may vary. You may really like the idea of what there is. Cavern of the Deep Tower, that connects into the sub-level, and some final rooms. Level 2 is I think, really fun. There is also an Otchug who can tell you prophecies and is kind of friendly. Maybe that's another example. Interestingly, again, really late in the level in terms of away from the stairwells that you're naturally going to go via. Maybe you've used the shaft. But yeah, the fact that there's an Otchug who doesn't want to eat you because he gets as much as you want. He wants a sewage deposit and then he'll give you a prophecy. It might be accurate, it might not. Level 3. By the way, these are fun. There's a similar one for level 2. Let's check, is there one for level 1 as well? Basically a picture of the factions on the level. I don't know, I think that's kind of a cool idea. No, there's not for ASC1. There's no equivalent. Yeah, the fact that you can see and envision the monsters there and then maybe pass that on to the players is a good feature. Here you've got Mokhtars. A tribe of Mokhtars has made their way in. Codmen, goblins, but this time they have a hive mind and therefore are more intelligent and dangerous than those on level 1. And the Hinge-headed, who have a crystal inside. Their kind of crystal intelligence is running bodies. They're very strange, fun monsters. Again, they know stuff. Here there is some sense that maybe of more interaction, I think, here on level 3. This is a flooded area. I think that the factions are more interesting, but maybe the map, I don't know if it's less interesting. Maybe the environmental thing is more interesting, but it's maybe less sort of typical in terms of the things, how players interact with environments. There is, I think, a way to drain it. But yeah, the Hinge-headed, who are a dark empire from the level below. The Codmen, who are natives, who are being basically attacked by everyone and want help. And want peace treaties, the Mokhtars, and the goblins who want to take over more space. Time passes again, and here this is maybe more generic actually, because it's just, I think it's more as trying to put stuff into stasis when you get down to this level for a while. But there is one important thing, which is there are more rumours. So if you're at the local pubs, particularly in the village nearby, there are false and true rumours, including some gags for the DM. A guy says that his friend Jim got left behind. He felt bad about leaving him there. It's all true except for feeling bad. So there's some gags for the DM. But yeah, anyway, here we go. supply cache. So you can Nimalan's expedition to the second level. Nimalan is the hinge-headed ambassador who his main advanced base is in the level below, and their main base is on the level below that, level 4, the Basalt Ziggurat. Let's have a look. Yeah, this is one thing to say is this is the first level you have the time passes happen on a level that you've already had time passes on, because this is the first entrance. So at this point, once you're interacting with the Mokhtars, you might be able to get in this way as well. Here we've got a map, nice clear cartography in terms of flooding is grey, non-flooded is white. That is good. It does mean, I don't think it's all like 10 foot underwater or something. Having run a few underwater adventures recently, it is interesting seeing the different dynamics that using actual underwater rules does. Here, some of it is genuinely pretty deep, but lots of it is you're splashing through stuff, so it is not a mechanical nightmare. Yeah, one thing I like about this level is I like that the factions not just are more interactive to start with, but I think also they are thematically quite rich. I think the Tribe of Catmen is good. I think the Dark Empire of Weird Crystal Intelligences from a level below is quite good. I think the Codmen, kind of Lakatha style creatures who kind of want peace and help, I think they're also not very nice necessarily. I think that's good. I think these feel more open to wide-ranging faction play than those even on level 2, let alone level 1. Room 35, this is a fun discovery room where you can look at different rooms and see stuff both, you've got hothouse areas on level 6, and this is obviously an advanced surface environment back in the day program that lets you see stuff. You get some discovery about what's going on in the world, but also you get to see what's going on there, including stuff that's way below you, level 6 with hothouse. I don't know we know anything about that, for instance, though you can imagine with the thirsty plants, the Mercury Lake and the sulfur caverns of level 8, presumably this is a video of what's happened there. The first men to reach level 8 found a vast lake in Mercury, upon which floated cut and faceted jewels. Just another kind of nice discovery room about what's going on, what's really the secret behind everything else. Here, again, like I said with Dr. Gills, the fact that once you're reading it, you see there is interactive capability. Here, the chief of the Codmen and his frock-coated Codmen advisors and his Codman Witch Doctor are playing a game. And it is possible then to make friends with them, you expect, because there's no order of battle information about them attacking them. That's one thing I should say, is that order of battle information completely lacking, and that feels, again, not even primitive, because older modules have that. For things that I think where counts of monsters might be really important, having an OOB would be really helpful. But yeah, that's an aside. It's not a massive thing. Again, in evolution, things that can happen. Humans devolve into Codmen, but evolve into Hypermen. Elves, dwarfs and halflings devolve into goblins, but because they're already hybrids, can't become anything else. Goblins can't regress further, but can become a hive mind. Mokhtars go to house cats, and they are the maximum evolution possible. And insect men just don't fit the program. That's fun. They don't experience a change in personality. Will likely be quite upset about the transformation. Good. Not good that they're upset, obviously, but yeah, good. These Toothmen, there's a couple of these across the dungeon of an ancient empire that's now fallen. But there are a few survivors. There is an example of something which I think is worth looking at here, the Fountain Room. There's a lot of stuff which makes more sense. It's fun as it is, but it makes more sense. Like the Crystal Skulls, or here most obviously with these coloured fountains, where I think pretty obviously Wetmore is playing a reference game. There are things here which, and some of them are inside gags, like elsewhere here there is the musical acts. But here you've got something which is a direct D&D reference, and the idea that, I guess, is that too twee? I don't think in practice players are going to think, I think there's an inside joke here I'm not getting. But there can be a degree, and I've seen this at tables actually, where players do wonder kind of why things are like they are. Why are things so weird? And so maybe that's an issue. I don't think it is. I think on the whole, it's an Easter egg for players who know those modules, DMs who know those modules. I think it's a tribute to where this stuff comes from, and it certainly shows the monster zoo and push buttons, weird stuff happens school of dungeon design that that Wetmore comes from. Put it this way, I don't think many people how can I put this? I don't think many OSR authors draw from some of the kind of fringier wells of old school design. I'm thinking about people like Bruce Cordell. A lot of them do draw, and this is the common inheritance from B1, B2. B2 is obviously Gygax, T1 and N1 for village design, things like that. And I think that's something where Wetmore doesn't really do much in terms of that kind of village design. There's a little bit of a hint of a tiny city-state, the Invincible Overlord in his Denethix, like the way he lists information, but much less detailed. But his dungeon design is profoundly B-series, particularly B1 and B2, more than anything else. Maybe a hint of B4 as well, with some of the kind of strangenesses and in literally inverted design kind of choices. But yeah, I think 62 is a good example of that influence coming in, which is, if you want to understand a lot of OSR design up to the present day, is to know that those are the key modules rather than some of the slightly broader canon, which I think is definitely worth looking at, being inspired by. So let's go down to another big boss at 81. Here, this is a standalone, Tomb of the Bone Lord. He likes bones. He's a weird dude with a top hat and nice clothes. It's a tuxedo. He's called Tranitaxin. He's a white. This is dumb. Again, this is something where I've kind of made this point that the flavour, the feel of these things is very much on the memorable but stupid, intentionally stupid end of things. And so I think, bearing that in mind, this is a good, memorable thing where he will wait until players have had a chance to drink the poisoned wine. So there is combat advice on it. This is expected to just be a fight. This is not a negotiation point. Room 90, also a humour one. Wires that tell you if you don't do stuff, you'll suffer, so you have to do pointless tasks, but you won't nothing actually bad will happen. So, though this one does actually kind of interact when you get there. So, but yeah, it's dumb. Players will enjoy it and find it funny, but maybe one thing. Here's a thing: is it good to simply yank players' chains? I think ASE maybe it gambles on yanking chains. It isn't doing the there's this very obvious cause and effect. You learn the skills to do well at stuff. In fact, sometimes it intentionally inverts that. Almost Tomb of Horrors style, actually. So on level 0, there is the 10-foot pole trap, where if you tap a pressure plate 10 foot ahead of you, with a 10-foot pole, you drop into a hole beneath you because it's set behind the trap. That's on a dead end corridor too. It's a joke corridor. So this is not in that sense though it does have that learning curve that I described, learning module almost, where you go to a small dungeon, then to a slightly larger dungeon, then into the full ASE. It's maybe fair to say that this is not really not designed as a classic cause and effect, learn skills kind of dungeon. There is a degree to which you are, even though you're not being screwed over as pathologically as in Lamentations modules, you are expected to take the rough with the smooth in a sort of wild, ridiculous way. And so the fact that your chain is being yanked cannot be, if players can't cope with that, this is a bad module, because otherwise one day they will get annoyed that they spent lots of time doing up to D8 on a table, pointless tasks. There we are. In the hundreds on this section, on this floor, you get the goblins and the hinge-headed. There's a really big, this is an interesting one, big, much like Dr. Giggles, much like, to a degree, the Codmen, though they're less interesting in terms of the room. Big negotiation or combat, big potential boss. Not like the Bone Lord, where it's just a fight to the death. But you've got Section Chief Bertelix, the hinge-headed, who's in charge of the outpost here. He's got his motionless Neanderthal slaves. And yeah, you've got a gold Mobius strip worth 250 gold pieces, an ancient disposable lighter, a small pouch containing dust of robotic paralysis, horns of Tesla on a scroll, a spell, a logbook which talks about stuff they've done, 930 gold pieces. So here, are you there to negotiate with him or to kill him for his treasure, or indeed negotiate with him for his treasure? I mean, I would say it's also something where when you are fighting potentially 13 things, you've got a hinge-headed with 4 HD and 12 Neanderthals with 2 HD each. That's a lot of people to fight. So are you gonna trick your way around that? Is that something? I mean, sleep could have an effect on the Neanderthals at least, though obviously that's capped at a fairly low level compared to 13 people. What's the solution? I think, again, when you're trying to open up things to players, this thing Wetmore is good at, that the options are, you can go one way, you could try to say, look, we'll help you conquer the ASE. You want to have an embassy with these guys, with the necromantic midgets, you want to kind of deal with the people on this level, you want to become more powerful, we'll help you, you're too powerful for us. The other option is, and I find players more often go for these kind of unwise, stupid options because they appeal to the gambler. They think, how could we screw these people over? How could we mess around with the obviously bizarre, awful underground empire with a basalt ziggurat? So I think that's quite successful. And yeah, the entries kind of talk about, I guess they give you a slight extra clues to what's going on as well. So it's also a kind of discovery room, maybe less so. Subsurface lock, aquatic hydra, vampiric flying piranhas, codmen, cave squid, albino catfish. Little rooms in there with the hydra's lair and stone with specks of gold in them, and a drain pipe, plastic buoy, which is a submarine you can go and look inside. That's fun. I think I was saying about the water maybe being a tedious obstacle or something like that. I think here the fact that you have suddenly a different environment adds value. Theming is one thing, and level 3 has weaker theming than level 2 by far. Level 2 has weird necromantic midget land, and there's an evil circus. Level 3 is more like, here's just some bases, here's some extra rooms. There's lots of dissociated rooms that aren't really much to do with the factions. I guess it's a level at war with itself, isn't it? But I think one thing that can help, even on a heavily themed level, is bits of the level which have a very distinct theme, and that even or especially works in the Monster Zoo because it disrupts the sense of endless blocks of monsters. You know, where you're like, here's another base of monsters. Something I think you can find with B2 from the core material, the core dungeon is that the Caves of Chaos are somewhat sort of repetitive in their, here's a room full of things. I think actually the most material criticism of B2 is not that it's got a monster zoo, but that the monster zoo sometimes feels a bit like, oh great, here's another one of these things we have to do. And that can be true, I think, with a lot of modules on that line. And so this very different environment, a very different place, can provide a diversion or an aesthetic refreshment. That's what I think anyway. I'm glad to know what you think. Should theming be very, very strong? Should it be very, very loose? What's the right balance? We are then heading on to the Deep Tower, which is, there's this guy Trimexis. He's a wizard, MU7, and he is not automatically bad. He doesn't really like you. He wants you to go away. He might make you unhappy. You might be able to, if you find him in the right place, you might be able to briefly be peaceful, but he wants to kill you eventually. The only subjects likely to gain his interest are news of the man from below, whom he despises for his ability to travel the tower freely, or the physical presence of Vera Grand. So there is a lever on this powerful character with his own little fortress. It's not a particularly complex fortress. It's got 6 levels. They connect levels 2 to 5, and the exits are on 2 and 5. I think off the top of my head anyway. And I think it's not in itself the most expansive, exciting edition. There's stuff there, you can look at it. I like the fact that one of the rooms lets you look out without its acrylic windows out over the basalt ziggurat with the legions of Neanderthals led by their hinge-headed. That's a very atmospheric, cool thing that I think players will enjoy, and that is therefore kind of a nice thing to have in there as you travel down. But here I think maybe what's interesting is just it creates a, much like the well shafts and things like that linking 1 and 3 and elsewhere, it gives you a sense of the interlocking spaces. The sub-level is its own genre, isn't it? You know, you get the weird sub-levels like the Gygaxian sub-levels where you're like, this kind of seems crazy, either intentionally crazy dumb stuff. This is not that kind of sub-level. This is the separately themed but connected. It's at the sort of level where if you are at level 3 or 4 and pushing around, you might be able to survive this, you might be able to negotiate your way around, you might have met the man from below, maybe you like the man from below, he seems fine, this guy seems difficult and unpleasant. What do you do? It's not necessarily the most exciting section of this, but it's nice to have in the mega dungeon, if we're going to get this 30% and nothing else. It's nice to have an articulation of that kind of trope or genre, subgenre of the mega dungeon, the sub-level. Here's your map. You can see connections. Level 6 is down onto level 5 of the ASE. Level 2 is onto level 2. And does 6 actually say it runs out to Under Miami? I don't know. Yeah, genuinely not sure. I think it is. Yeah, the button that goes out into Under Miami, which is how the man from below gets back up to his weird place up at level 2. So we then move on to, there's some spells. Now here, I think these are mostly, again, funny, dumb spells. There's Intestinal Distress, there's a Chi Slap. Here, Phantom Ally. You can summon a Phantom Ally who has 16 hit points. HD 4 fires spirit energy from its mouth and eyes. Roll d6, find out. It's Hector of Troy. It's Mozart. This stuff, I mean, that's a good spell. It is a level 3 spell, so it's not even insanely high to get a good summon. But it's also dumb. It's meant to be, I think there is as I say, a propensity to just say, what's the funny thing here? What's the laugh? You can cut that out, of course, but I think you'd lose an integral part of ASE to say, no, I'd rather not have the stupid fun stuff. The magic items, pretty much the same, really. Super Science and magic items come next. The magic items, there's a beard of bees. There's a fungal staff. There's Glove of Mesmeric Dancing. The Super Science, actually, I think might be more broadly applicable, i.e. in your less funny science fantasy game. You've got Submersible Flashlight, a Proximity Sensor, Tournament Recorder, maybe that's the wrong call from me, a Galvanic Sword, a Dust of Robotic Paralysis, things like that. And I think those are basically mechanically executing things which you can use in different subgenres. And this is something I think that's fun about Old School's Essential, that I think what the plan is soon, in the next few years, to have a kind of apocalyptic fantasy, gamma worldy kind of supplement. Putting in mechanics for, because D&D is a more flexible game than it's credited for. It is not strictly a Western fantasy dungeon oriented and purely dungeon oriented in terms of medieval dungeon kind of tropes adventure system. It can cope with more samurai tales. It can cope with the sort of gonzo sci fantasy genre, and so I think it's not inappropriate to think, well, could it be used for your Martian Adventures campaign? There's also an argument that there are enough distinctions in Lee Brackett and in Edgar Rice Burroughs that really you should have a different system that copes with those better. But I think mechanically executing that is one of the big contributions of this for me. As I say, with the classes, as I said earlier, is I love the dungeons in lots of ways, but I think the fact that this provides the supplement to run basic D&D science fantasy, even if you're not running the dungeons, I'd buy these supplements for all this extra stuff, I think. There's also a big expansion to the monster manual below the magic items. This is on top of what was the case in number 1. Aerial Jellyfish, Algae Nightmare, you could definitely use that one elsewhere. Lots and lots of, there's kind of 3 pages of automata. This, again, combined with number one, it's one of the more generally useful things. Eye jellies and corpse curtain, which is obviously a flexible, differently located form of the living wall, which is used in a really fantastic way in Gates of Firestorm Peak by Bruce Cordell. This is, again, just more generally useful, and I think is, again, we're talking like 40 pages or something of monsters, just under that. So you're talking about a massive amount of space put into providing monsters that you could use in any of your campaigns. And as I say, lots of them are very good. Some of them are more specific to the setting, but there's no reason why you couldn't take the hinge-headed, the crystal intelligences with their bodies and their basalt ziggurat. Why not put that in any other, with their Neanderthal slaves, in any other dungeon environment or in any other place, underground, in the Underdark. I think it's great. This is a really big addition, I think. There are some stupid ones. The Fiji mermaid from the Freak Show, who is half ape, half mermaid. There's a toilet stalker. Basically think Tombs from the X-Files, but as a mimic, I guess. These are dumb. Again, they're going to be less broadly applicable, but, you know, they are in fitting with the general game. There's also, at the end, there are some kind of appendix images with like maps and stuff, but not the general maps of the whole dungeon, just particular resources for particular areas. All of this, I'd say, is a pick and choose thing. It's part of a broader setting, not the dungeon, so you can say, I want this, not this. I like these magic items, these super science items, these class features. I love the robot, but I hate the scientist, that kind of thing. So it's all pick and choose, and though this is much more dungeon than this one, this actually has even more usable material that has nothing to do, is setting agnostic, whereas this is setting heavy, aside from the kind of the magic items and monsters. I think there's enough content over the 3 levels plus the starter dungeon plus the 0 level. There's enough content here for years. I think there's really endless invention, including playing on tropes and things that have gone by already, like the B1 magic fountain room thing. It's all in one register. There are varieties, there are modulations, but you know, it's a criticism perhaps, or it's a piece of praise that this is in one register. Essentially, it's all in this frankly ridiculous, not really psychedelic, but more sometimes intentionally somewhere between sophomoric and surrealist. If you like that, then you'll love it. If you don't, then the value here is going to be in the bonus material, I think. It's surely one of the classics of the OSR. It's not at the forefront of usability, but I don't look at the material and think it's been bettered or blown past by everyone since. You're going to have to put some work into just knowing what's in there, but it's not incredibly hard to run. I think it's necessary reading if you're trying to think about how big dungeons are constructed, about how you set up factional tinderboxes, even where these don't work. As soon as you realise why they don't work, as soon as you're frustrated by something in such a comprehensive work, you're able to improve. Basically, comprehensive works are always flawed, but where they are flawed, you'll generally learn from them. Whereas the weaker or less ambitious work will tend to leave you not sure what you didn't like. And I don't think I have the problem here with that. I don't always love the factional setups. I think that sometimes you get a lot of rooms where you're like, okay, these aren't boring, but they are certainly not as strong as this section of rooms. But I think it's very clear what's going on and what's strong and what's not, and that's itself a learning exercise for me. I think they are basically the supplement for Science Fantasy D&D. I think if you're interested in that, you have to get them and read them, or at least read them, even if you aren't interested in running the dungeon. I think it's not a complete mega dungeon, so maybe you can't compare it to Barrow-Maze or Stonehell, but in terms of the great OSR mega dungeons, it's one of the very best, because it has such a unity of vision that it's executed at length so well. I think it's got a lot of good stuff in it that lots of DMs will find useful. I know my players really enjoy it, and they enjoy the world in general, and they enjoy being able to go off and do different things. They're currently in the Nightwolf Inn, they're not even in the Land of Thousand Towers, but I know they're looking forward to going back to see some of a story hook that I dropped of one of Gus L's supplementary adventures. There's so much material out there from particularly Gus L that can add on to this. So yeah, I recommended ASE 1. I recommend ASE 2 to 3. I probably recommend it in a limited sense more. You need ASE 1 first to really get it, obviously. But I think ASE 2 to 3, by adding in classes, by adding in the rival adventuring parties, by being more ambitious in its dungeon levels, I think that it is probably the better of the two books. Some people will say differently. Some people, I think, prefer just the kind of setup in the sense of the land. But I think for the Mega Dungeon, particularly, as well as for the Science Fantasy supplement, 2 to 3 is the better one. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. Tell me any other Science Fantasy supplements or games that you think are worth looking at, and anything else you think is relevant. Till next time.